Alright, hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and with me today, like yesterday, is Chaz. How you doing today, Chaz?
Hello, what's going on?
I am ready to talk about some sweet white cards from Shadows over Innistrad. So this is day 2 of our Shadows over Innistrad set review. Today we will be covering all of the white rare and mythics from the set. And first off, we have maybe the most powerful mythic in the set, one of the most powerful, Archangel Avacyn. And also, she flips around to Avacyn the Purifier. So, Chaz, thoughts on Avacyn?
Well, I think you're correct in saying definitely one of the strongest mythics in Shadows over Innistrad. I think it's extremely strong, and we have seen the downfall of Sarah Angel being completely obsolete because Archangel Avacyn is a strict, amazing upgrade over what we've grown accustomed to over Magic history. It just brings a lot to the table. I think having Flash really opens up a lot of different ways and plays to utilize Archangel Avacyn. Some interesting things you can do with cards like Eldrazi Displacer to manipulate the triggers on both sides to your advantage. And some crazy, mad killer angel is on the loose, and I think it definitely epitomizes the flavor and the power of a killer angel.
So, you said that Sarah Angel is no longer relevant, but what about Sierra Angel?
Sierra Angel will always be the best angel.
Avacyn is insane. I mean, the combination of abilities on this card is just absurd. Flash on a 4/4 flyer already lets you eat an attacking creature, or it lets you play it at the end of turn to pressure your opponent. Flying in Vigilance means it's always getting in damage, plus it's always back to block. So in a control deck, not only are you beating down and killing your opponent, but you got that blocker back so your planeswalkers aren't going to just die, or your life total isn't going to go to 0. And then plus it makes everything indestructible so it can just counter a Wrath or absolutely blow your opponent out in combat. Can you imagine like the board being gummed up in, I don't know, like a Abzan mirror or something, and your opponent goes for this big attack, and you like block and just flash in Archangel Avacyn and make all of your things indestructible? It's almost a Wrath in and of itself in some situations. So the card just seems absurd to me. It's got to see a lot of play. Modern, I'm questionable about. Can it compete with things like Baneslayer in Modern, Chaz?
I think it can. I mean, I really think it can. The ability, like you said, is just so powerful that you might consider Archangel Avacyn over a card like Baneslayer Angel. Having Flash is really good, and it really makes the second part of this ability so much better. When you think about Standard in particular, obviously it's going to be a little hard to flip Archangel Avacyn in the same turn that you are playing Archangel Avacyn, since everything is indestructible. But when you think about it, you have cards like Nantuko Husk in the format, and you could flip Archangel of Avacyn by sacrificing a creature that gets around the indestructible clause, and the rest of your creatures still don't die because they still have indestructible.
Yeah, and even discounting that in a control deck where you're not playing little creatures, that's just like pure upside. You got an Anger of Gods attached to this crazy flyer already, so it seems like it can just win games on its own if you can build your deck in a way where your opponent's board is probably getting wiped, but either you don't have a lot of creatures, or all of your creatures are big enough that they survive the 3 damage. It just seems like blowouts all the way around. Like the front half is a blowout, the back half can be a blowout. Yeah. I don't care what side of Avacyn you choose, someone's getting blown out by it. That's the story of this card for me.
Yeah, I think that about sums up Archangel Avacyn quite nicely. A huge blowout.
In a good way. In a way that you want to put it in your deck.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can manipulate either side as you choose. And like you said, the Anger of the Gods version, when you flip to Avacyn the Purifier, you can use that to your advantage too. And if this is all going on at conceivably your opponent's end step, you get to have a 6/5 flying on your turn and any other creature that may have survived the Anger of the Gods part.
Speaking of wraths that Avacyn won't save you from, let's talk about Descend upon the Sinful. So, a wrath, but it exiles all creatures, and maybe gives you a 4/4 angel if you're lucky enough.
Those pesky fishermen, right?
Yes, this card gave us one of the best printing errors in recent years. Descend upon the fisherman in the French version. That will never be unfunny to me. Every time I hear it, I still laugh.
Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, Archangel Avacyn won't save you from Descend Upon the Sinful. That is true. At 6 mana, I don't know how much control decks or any kind of deck is going to be leaning on this card. Maybe it has some kind of applications. Obviously, exiling is powerful, so if you need a mass exile for all creatures to get rid of those pesky Relentless Dead from coming back and destroying you, then you might want to look at Descend Upon the Sinful. Getting a 4/4 Angel for your trouble is okay, but I'm not really excited about this card, especially at Mythic. Like Seth always says, this card does not deserve to be Mythic.
Yeah, to me, I think that the ceiling of this card is maybe like a one of in a control deck in support of like Planner Outburst or Languish, because it does deal with some situations that the other Wraths won't. If you had a bunch of Relentless Dead or an Ulamog across the table, you're really going to be glad if you can, I don't know, +1 your Jace and find a Descend Upon the Sinful instead of a Planner Outburst. But most of the time, 6 mana is just too much for standard. Anyway, only 2 white mythics, so now we get to talk about some rares. First up, we have Always Watching, and I have to say, one thing I love in my anthems is giving vigilance. Intangible Virtue, I mean, it's restrictive and you need tokens, but that might be one of the most powerful, like, crusades ever printed. It's just so good because you get to attack and still have your creatures back on defense, which vigilance, when it's incidental like this, I mean, you're playing this because you want to pump up your team, but when it's incidental vigilance, just like incidental life gain, it wins a lot of games, and it's a surprisingly powerful effect to give your team.
Yeah, I think Vigilance is, like you said, on Anthems is really strong. And obviously Intangible Virtue was powerful enough to be banned and block constructed. Not that anyone really plays block constructed anymore, but I think that's the argument here, is that it is a really strong. It's not as restrictive as tokens. Non-token creatures are obviously more viable in when we look at Shadows over Innistrad standard. You're going to be playing a lot more. Obviously, we don't have Lingering Souls this time around, so you're going to be playing with a lot of non-token creatures. And like you said, giving them incidental vigilance might seal the deal later on in the game when you have a large army that doesn't even have to tap to attack.
And maybe the bigger thing with this card is a lot of the recent Anthem effects that we've seen have been legendary, like Spear of Helioid. So being able to actually stack these and have the second and third and fourth copy not just be a dead draw is a pretty big deal. Like, you can have 4 of these on the battlefield and make your 2/2 into a 6/6. Like, that is a thing that can happen with Always Watching. So I think this card is good. If there's aggressive white weenie type decks, it will certainly be a part of them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a strong Anthem, and it serves its purpose in very aggressive lists.
So up next we have an intro pack rare. It's 8 mana, you get a 6/6 flyer, Angel of Deliverance. If you have Delirium, it can exile things when it does something. So I don't know. This is bad, right, Chaz?
Yeah, well, obviously it's an intro pack rare. The couple positive things about it, I guess we can let Tomer elaborate more in EDH, but when we see 8 mana, we obviously give a thumbs up to EDH players, so that's kind of our expertise in that area. I do think it's good with a card like Thalia the Vast. I know that people have mentioned that, so it's a really good top-end Angel, especially if you have Delirium, because attacking or dealing damage, it has evasion, and you get to exile something for your trouble.
Yeah, and one thing I do like about it is, what was the mythic angel from Zendikar that when you had landfall it would exile a creature?
Angel of Admonition?
That's right, Admonition Angel. The thing I like about this, though, is you don't give the creatures back when Angel of Deliverance dies. A lot of these effects are worded like an Oblivion Stone, where you get to exile it, but then if someone Doomblades your Angel, you give the opponent their creatures back. It exiles forever, so if you get in a hit or two with it, at least it's a removal spell, and the body's pretty big. Like, obviously, 8 mana is just a no-bo for Standard. You can't play 8 mana 6/6 flyers in Standard, and almost always. But in Commander, I bet it's pretty decent.
Yeah.
Speaking of Standard, this one might have a chance. At least it's not 8 mana. Bygone Bishop, so flying spirit, and it does some investigating.
It does some investigating, and yeah, it doesn't cost 8 mana. It costs 3. It does have flying. It's a really interesting card. It's a new take on Mentor of the Meek from the first Innistrad. I look at this card and I was really excited, and then there's another card that we're going to be talking about in later videos that I think just absolutely trumps this card. So I'm not really as excited as I once was about it. But if you need Investigate and you're playing a lot of creature spells with under converted mana cost 3, then I think Bygone Bishop is a card you might want to look at.
I will say, when I first read the card, I was like, yeah, another Mentor of the Meek. Okay, we've seen this before. Maybe it's better because you can pay the mana later and it has flying. But as the set was spoiled and we saw all the set, there are a lot of things that care about clue tokens. Like, when you sack a clue token, this happens, or when you sack a clue token, this happens. So maybe there's some really janky, like, clue token deck out there where you're trying to take advantage of the actual sacking of clue tokens, which I think sounds really sweet. I'm sure it probably isn't good, and I wouldn't expect it to show up at a pro tour or anything, but I think you can make a pretty, like, cool, janky, casual clue token deck, and this would probably be a part of it.
It's a friend for our poor for our old spirit rattle chains to pair up with.
That is true. Rattlechain needs some friends.
It definitely does. At least it has Bygone Bishop.
I think this one will see play in Constructed. Declaration in Stone, another removal spell. There's been quite a few removal spells at Rare in this set, but this one I think is decent.
I think it's decent too, and yeah, like you said, there's been a lot of rare removal spells, and this one is certainly good in its own right too. Exiling is always a plus, and if you're removing a card like, say, Ulamog, then I think giving your opponent a clue token is a pretty good trade-up.
Yeah, I think that's true. Obviously, situational. Some creatures are better to hit with it than others. The big upside for me is that you can exile any number of the same token without letting your opponent investigate. So that is pretty exciting to me, and it's obviously good against big, indestructible creatures. Even a Relentless Dead, like, giving them a clue token is probably fine to get rid of Relentless Dead forever, but you're not just going to fire this off on your opponent's random 2/2 for 2, their Grizzly Bear, and be happy about it. So I think that it'll see play, but you want to save it for the right targets where you're really getting value from it.
Yeah, this is the card that we paired with Anguish Unmaking on the podcast that said that, and we said, and I still think it's true, that there's going to be some sort of split between this and Anguish Unmaking, just like, because when you talked about Anguish Unmaking, you're right, playing 12 life over the course of the game for 4 of those, maybe you want to play some number of Declaration in Stone to alleviate that.
Now we have another really expensive flyer. Seems to be a theme of white rares. A 7 mana 4/4 flyer. You can use it to gain some life and make some spirits. Drogskol Cavalry.
Yeah, another intro pack rare. Not really as interesting as Angel of Deliverance, but you're building some sort of spirit tribal deck and you want to gain life while you're playing spirits, then this is the card for you.
Yeah, and I mean, Spirit Knight is a pretty cool creature type. I don't think we have too many Spirit Knights around, so
I don't think so either. The upside of this card is it's a 1-card army, so that's at least good.
Yeah, I mean, cards like this aren't made for Standard, but they're made for people that like the flavor, have a casual spirit token deck or something. So I think the card is good for what it was designed to be. It just wasn't designed to be a Standard staple.
Yeah, I think that that evaluation is very good.
Speaking of a card that could show up in Standard, how about Eerie Interlude, the new Ghostway?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting take on an old card in Ghostway back in Guild Pack. Eerie Interlude is, when you look at what's in Standard in April when sets rotate and what we get to have, the cards that remain, this just seems insane with cards like Reflector Mage or anything else that just has on battlefield triggers. And the interesting part of Eerie Interlude that was changed from its predecessor in Ghostway is you can choose the cards that you want to flip.
Yeah, and there are a lot of really good enter the battlefield triggers, so I think that this card could see play in standard. I know the argument against that is people say, oh, Ghostway didn't really see play in its standard, but I think this card might have the support to do it. Like, it's already depressing to have an opponent play Reflector Mage, and then, like, Collected Company, hit another Reflector Mage. It just sets you back so far, but I imagine this fitting into that package. Like, get a couple of Reflector Mage, blink them with Eerie Interlude, maybe flashback Eerie Interlude with Jace, and oh my goodness, that sounds miserable. Like, you get tempoed out of the game so hard. Thank God that Siege Rhino is rotating. That would also be pretty miserable. So.
Yeah, that would be really miserable.
And the other exciting part is Ghostway is part of a fringe combo deck in Modern where you're like infinitely looping Eternal Witnesses to get back Ghostway, and this card gives that deck 4 more copies of Ghostway, which maybe is the thing that deck needs to move up from tier 3 to tier 2.5 to have some more redundancy with its key like combo card.
Yeah, that's something we should consider going forward. But yeah, I mean, when we look at cards, maybe there's not enough right now, but as we continue to go on with Eldritch Moon and any subsequent sets after that, obviously we might get some extra key components to play along with Eerie Interlude.
And it is one of those cards that just gets better. Like, the more enter the battlefield triggers are printed, like, this card is just going to keep getting better and better. Even in its life in standard, like you were saying, like, there's a lot more sets to enter standard why this is in standard, so who knows what combo could develop over the next 18 months.
Yeah, and I think what you said is really important. When you add more redundancy you add another couple sets of cards like Ghostway to a Ghostway type deck that's trying to extract value out of that, it's always something to keep in mind, because this is a card that stands the test of time, and like you said, it just keeps getting better as they keep printing creatures with enter the battlefield abilities.
Yeah, so I like it. I don't know if it'll find a home in standard, but this is one of my favorite rares in the set. So next we have Hanweir Militia Captain that can flip around into Westvale Cult Leader. So our second, we had Avacyn. So our second white flip card, Chaz, what do you think of this one?
It's a really interesting card. I want to say I love how they took on flipping in this set. It's not always just the typical werewolf flipping. It has now grown to other creature types and other ways of flipping cards. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a mythic flipping sorcery. But yeah, this is pretty cool. So a 2-mana 2/2 isn't really inspiring on its own, but when it does flip, it gets a lot more formidable. I think it could find its way into a white-based aggressive list, along with a card like Ever Watchful or Always Watching. And like I said, when it flips, it's a very formidable card.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of an army in a can once it flips, because its power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control, plus it just keeps generating creatures. So it seems pretty powerful once it's flipped around, and there is some reasons to play humans in Shadows over Innistrad. There are some human synergies, so maybe it's good enough in a white weenie / white humans type deck.
Yeah, let me keep in mind that most flip cards have a way to flip back. Once you flip the Militia Captain, it cannot flip back. So it really stays powerful for once it flips one time.
You know what they kind of remind me of, the cards that don't flip back like this, are the Kamigawa flip cards, I guess they were, that would flip into like a more powerful creature, but then they don't flip back around. So I see that kind of upside. Like, the flavor is not the same, but I could picture these abilities being on a Kamigawa flip card.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the Cult Leader is a really great card, and you don't have to worry about your opponent playing 2 spells or something like that to flip it back to a measly 2-mana 2/2 anymore. Once it's flipped once, you're good to go.
Once it's flipped, it stays flipped. That is the benefit of the Cult Leader. Well, speaking of humans, we have another version of Odric Lunarch Marshal. So this one has a ton of text. Basically, as long as you have a creature with any ability that has ever been printed, Odric is going to give all your creatures that ability at the beginning of each combat phase.
Yeah, so we don't get banding or some of the other keywords that we've seen in Magic history. But yeah, like Seth said, you get a lot of bonuses. Obviously, Odric is back in a big way and a lot more viable this time around.
It seems pretty sweet. It's definitely interesting and limited. As a 3/3 for 4, those don't scream constructed worthy stats. So I think it's going to depend on the deck. If you're constantly triggering double strike, for example, or flying, you can get in a ton of damage. So I think it's a little restricted in what kind of deck you would play it in, just because its base stats aren't really above the curve or even on curve for constructed. But it does do a lot for a little amount of mana, and it definitely seems like another casual hit.
I'm a little more optimistic about Odric. I do think it could be a casual hit, but this is the card that ends games. I mean, if you play this, Odric doesn't have to attack. It just has to be on the battlefield for your creatures to get a lot of benefits. And just keep in mind, it gets every benefit for every creature that has any of these abilities. So all your creatures can be hexproof, flying, double striking, indestructible creatures as long as Odric's on the battlefield. And he doesn't have to attack himself, and you get the perk every time you attack.
Too bad Chromaticor is no longer in Standard, Chaz.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
They would be best friends.
Yeah, and keep in mind it's each combat.
And some of the combination of abilities are really hard to beat. Like Death Touch and First Strike is really miserable in combat. Flying can get through a lot of damage. So maybe it's better than I'm giving it credit for.
Yeah, it's a really innocuous card, but really powerful.
Well, the parade of humans continues. Our last white rare is Thalia's Lieutenant. So a 1/1 for 2. When it enters the battlefield, you get to Anthem or put a +1/+1 counter on all your humans, and then when you play human, it acts like Champion of the Parish and gets a +1/+1 counter.
Yeah, speaking of Champion of the Parish, these two pair very well. And you have a very large Champion of the Parish on turn 2. I really like Thalia's Lieutenant. Obviously, it gives humans a really big boon to the tribal archetype, and it could open up a few doors to a human tribal deck in Modern.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the big calling cards to build a humans deck in Standard and possibly Modern as well. Like, being able to put a +1/+1 counter on your team means that it's going to be relevant in the late game because you're getting that effect. And it's also relevant on turn 2, especially if you have a 1-drop. But even without a 1-drop, just as another Champion of the Parish. Like, there's some decks that can grow Champion of the Parish extremely quickly. And if you have double Champion of the Parish because you have a Thalia's Lieutenant, things could get out of hand pretty fast.
Yeah, I like the fact that this card alone makes Champion of the Parish a 3/3 on turn 2. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that is an aggressive start. When you can attack for 3 on turn 2, and then it's going to progressively grow turn after that, along with Thalia's Lieutenant, that seems like it could be a Modern playable start. Like, you essentially build your own Wild Nacatl.
Yeah, not only do you get your Wild Nacatl to the 3/3, obviously, but then it grows exponentially after that, essentially getting +2/+2 every time, getting 2 counters every human that enters the battlefield.
I like it. I think it's a pretty sweet card, and it fits well with the human theme of Shadows over Innistrad. So that's our last white card, Chaz. Any wrap-up thoughts about the white rares and mythics?
White is pretty good overall. It definitely has some role players. It has a couple stinkers in there, but it comes with this, any set. You're going to have a couple of uninspiring rares, and that's okay. But overall, I think White's pretty strong.
Yeah, I agree. I think White got some really decent cards, headlined by Avacyn, which could go down as one of, if not the most powerful card in the whole set. So that's the big highlight as far as constructed power level. But it's got a lot of flavor and a lot of synergy, so I think that we could see some of these white cards band together and make a constructed deck, especially the humans, so...
Absolutely. Yeah, I would not be surprised in the slightest. And like you said, Avacyn is the front runner for one of the best, if not the best card in the set. It's White, so you have to give White a very good grade.
So just like last time, Chaz, favorite card. If you got to pick a white one, what one do you pick?
This is rough. I think it has to go to the Thalia's Lieutenant.
All right, Thalia's Lieutenant's a good choice. I think I'm going to go the predictable route and go with Avacyn. Avacyn just has so much going on. I know that's not a very cool pick, but it's just so good that it's hard.
Yes.
And the flavor is there as well. So just all around, that card for me is a slam dunk, and I got to pick it.
Yeah, I had to pick something other than Avacyn. Obviously, Avacyn's really strong, but can't pick the best card every time. Have to be a little different.
Anyway, that was our Shadows over Innistrad white review. Make sure to tune into the channel tomorrow when we will be heading back to Shadows over Innistrad for another color.